All right, today we are starting Concept 1, the nature of science. Science is a particular way of knowing about the world. In science, explanations are limited to those based on observations and experiments that can be substantiated by other scientists. Explanations that cannot be based on empirical evidence are not a part of science. So what we really need to understand here is that if they cannot be substantiated by other scientists, this means that if we both don't get the same answer when we do an experiment, then it's not considered true science and we have to keep trying and revising until we are able to get the same answer. So before we begin moving on with other concepts in science, we first need to be on the same page with a few scientific terms. Sometimes we use terms differently in everyday language than we do in science. So first of all, let's start with a fact. A fact is an objective, verifiable observation. An example of this is that water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. We know this is always the case, well, when at sea level. This is slightly different from a principle, which is a statement based on repeated experimental observations that describes an aspect of the world. An example of this is the greenhouse effect, which we will talk about more later on in the year. So looking at a few more scientific terms, we now need to talk about the difference between a law and a theory. A law is a broad concept or principle that is focused on the how. It is often describing the patterns in nature and is often accepted as facts. Whereas when we look at theory, this is an explanation of an observed phenomenon. It organizes facts and research from scientists in order to explain the why. It also never becomes fact or law. So an example of this that we'll talk about is evolutionary theory. Science is based on experimentation. Therefore, our understanding is always being built upon new findings. When we're doing science, there isn't one way to design an experiment. However, the investigative process tends to lead through a following general sequence. So we're going to talk about each of these individually, but they are ask a question, conduct background research, construct a hypothesis, test your hypothesis, analyze data, and draw conclusions and communicate about them. The first step of a scientific investigation is to always ask a question. Questions often arise from the observations that we make. An observation is a description of something you can see, smell, touch, taste, or hear. It is not an opinion, meaning it must be objective. It must be the same for everyone. So an example of this is that we could see with our eyes or one of our senses that the ground is wet. We're not saying we know why the ground is wet. We just simply see that the ground is wet. This is different from an inference because an inference is a guess about an object or outcome based on your observations. Here you're drawing conclusions. So you can make many inferences from a single observation. So if we use our same observation of the ground being wet, examples of an inference can be that it rained, or maybe that someone was watering the plants. We don't know for sure. We didn't see it happen. We just know that the ground is wet, and these are possible explanations for that. All right, so we want to use this picture as an example between the difference of an observation and an inference. We don't necessarily know anything about this set of people, but some observations that we can make is that there are 5 people in this picture. We know that that's a fact. Other observations that we can make is that 4 of the 5 people are wearing shorts. So it's important to keep in mind that observations are things that we can see, smell, taste, touch, or hear. We know these for sure. So now if we try to draw some inferences about this same picture, we may say that this is a grandpa with his grandchildren on vacation. They look like they have some sort of souvenirs over here. Those would be inferences. We don't know that he's their grandpa, or that these are his grandchildren, but that's likely, so it's a possibility, but we don't know that for sure. We have one more thing to talk about when discussing observations. They fit in one of two categories. They can either be qualitative or quantitative. Qualitative observations are something that describes the qualities. So examples of this are green liquids, large holes, sour in taste or sweet in smell. So qualitative observations are describing qualities, so we want to use adjectives. This is different from quantitative observations that use numbers to measure something. So examples here, we would say 4 feet long, 6 legs, 7.2 grams, or 100 milliliters. Notice when we're using quantitative observations, we always added what the units were. So again, looking at this picture as an example, we first want to see what qualitative observations we can make. So something descriptive. Here we could say this child has blonde hair. There are white cabinets. It is a small child. Okay, those are all descriptive. Something that we could use in a quantitative form is that there is one child. We're describing the numbers. We could count how many cookies there are. I don't want to count, but we could count and see how many cookies are. That would be using numbers to describe our observation. And when we're talking about quantitative data, there are some other things we need to specify. Quantitative data must be precise, and this is how close your measurements are to each other. So when precision, we want to think how consistent, how often are you getting the same answer? And for qualitative data being accurate, we want to think how close your measurement is to the correct or the accepted value. So is this the right answer? All right, so now we have 4 different bullseyes here, and we want to decide which of these 4 are precise, which one's accurate, or both or neither. So precise, again, means how close they are to each other, and accurate, how close they are to the correct answer. So for accuracy on a bullseye, you want to be in the center circle. So for this first bullseye here, we are looking at all of 4 dots being in the center and next to each other. So we are going to say that this is both precise and accurate. On this second one over here, they are touching each other, but they are not in the center here where we want the correct answer to be. So we are going to say that this bullseye is precise, but not accurate. If we move down to the bottom here, we are not touching each other, but we are touching the correct answer, which means this is going to be accurate, but not precise. And then lastly, in our last bullseye, they are not touching each other, and they are also not touching the correct answer inside the bullseye, which makes this accurate, not accurate, and not precise.